At 4:03 a.m. local time, a chain of explosions ripped along a half-mile stretch of railway near the Dzhankoi junction in northern Crimea, throwing burning steel and shattered armor plating across 3 sets of parallel tracks. Farmers in a village 2 miles distant would later describe a sound like a series of hammer blows growing louder and louder, followed by a single concussive roar that rattled every window on the eastern edge of the settlement. What had detonated was not fuel and not ammunition, at least not at first. It was armor. A Russian military train hauling 10 T-90 main battle tanks, 6 BMP-3 infantry fighting vehicles, and the fuel and ammunition needed to bring that entire armored group into combat had just been struck by a coordinated Ukrainian FPV drone package at the single most vulnerable point on its entire journey into Crimea. Each T-90 aboard that train represented roughly $4.5 million of Russian armored capability. The most modern main battle tank Russia fields in meaningful numbers, fitted with relict explosive reactive armor, the Kalina fire control system, and the 2 of 46M5 125mm smoothbore gun. 10 of them, loaded onto a single train, represented an entire tank battalion's worth of frontline combat power moving toward the southern front in one shipment. 9 Ukrainian drone operators were about to demonstrate that the most dangerous moment in the life of a main battle tank is not on the battlefield at all. It is strapped to a railway flat car, immobile, unable to maneuver, unable to fight back, hours before it ever reaches the front. And they were going to prove it with drones that cost less than a single track link on one of those tanks. If this is your first time on the channel, here's what we do. Every strike gets the full technical breakdown, second by second, system by system, drawn from open source satellite imagery, intercepted communications analysis, and verified frontline footage. We don't just tell you what got hit. We tell you why the defenses failed, why the timing worked, and what it actually means for the war. Subscribe and hit the notification bell right now, because what happened to this armored train after the first drone struck reveals exactly why railway interdiction has become one of the most decisive forms of warfare on the entire Eastern Front. To understand why an armored train represented a target worth weeks of intelligence preparation, you have to understand the problem Russia faced in moving tanks into Crimea in the first place. A T-90 main battle tank weighs 48 tons. It has a road range of roughly 340 miles on internal fuel. But driving main battle tanks hundreds of miles under their own power is something no competent military does if it can possibly avoid it. Every mile driven wears out track links, road wheels, torsion bars, and engine hours, consuming a tank's mechanical lifespan before it ever fires a shot in anger. It burns enormous quantities of fuel, and it leaves a column of heavy vehicles strung out along a road for miles, presenting exactly the kind of target that Ukrainian drone and missile forces had spent the entire war learning to exploit. For all these reasons, armor moves by rail whenever rail is available. A single train can move an entire tank battalion in one shipment, faster, cheaper, and with less mechanical wear than driving even a fraction of that force overland. The problem for Russia was that rail movement into Crimea had become a bottleneck of extreme vulnerability. The Kerch Bridge rail line had been repeatedly degraded. The Chandhar corridor had been struck, and the surviving rail routes all funneled through a small number of junctions and crossings that Ukrainian intelligence watched with obsessive attention. The Dzhankoi junction in particular was the single most important rail node in northern Crimea, the point where multiple lines converged before distributing traffic across the peninsula and toward the southern front. Any armored train entering Crimea by rail had to pass through or near this junction. That geographic inevitability made it the natural focus of Ukrainian interdiction planning. Russia knew this too, which is why the approaches to Dzhankoi were among the most heavily defended stretches of railway in all of occupied Ukraine, layered with Panzer's one air defense, electronic warfare coverage, and a rapid reaction security presence specifically tasked with protecting high-value rail movements. Ukraine's Defense Intelligence Directorate, the GUR, had been tracking Russian armored rail movements toward Crimea for months. But this particular train drew special attention for a specific reason. Human intelligence sources operating near the loading yards at Armyansk, where the train had taken on its armored cargo after crossing from the mainland, reported that the flat cars were carrying not the older T-72 and T-80 variants that made up the bulk of routine reinforcement shipments, but the newer T-90M, a tank Russia produces in limited numbers and cannot afford to lose in quantity. A train carrying 10 T-90 tanks was not routine resupply. It was the movement of an irreplaceable capability, and destroying it would inflict a loss that Russian industry could not quickly make good. The intelligence picture. GUR analysts built the targeting picture from 3 converging intelligence streams over a period of 9 days once the train's cargo was confirmed. Commercial satellite imagery tracked the train's assembly at Armyansk, confirming the count of 10 tank flat cars. 6 additional flat cars carrying infantry, fighting vehicles, and a cluster of tank cars and boxcars at the rear, carrying the fuel and ammunition needed to make the armored group combat-ready on arrival. The imagery also confirmed a detail that would shape the entire strike plan. The train's fuel and ammunition cars were positioned at the rear of the consist, separated from the armor by a gap of empty flat cars, a standard Russian precaution designed to prevent a single strike on the volatile cargo from destroying the expensive armor as well. SEBU signals intelligence teams monitoring Russian rail dispatcher communications provided the second stream. The train's projected schedule, its priority routing status, and crucially, the fact that it was scheduled to hold at a siding roughly 4 miles north of the Dzhankoi junction for a period of approximately 40 minutes while a higher priority southbound train cleared the junction ahead of it. That scheduled hold was the single most important piece of intelligence in the entire operation. A moving train is a difficult target, requiring the strike package to solve a tracking and intercept problem against a target changing position at 30 to 40 miles per hour. A stationary train held at a siding, a position known in advance, immobile for a known window of time, was a fundamentally different and far more favorable targeting problem. The strike would be timed to hit the train during its scheduled hold. The third intelligence stream came from GER's analysis of the air defense coverage around the siding itself. The Panzer's 1 battery responsible for protecting the Dzhankoi approaches was positioned to cover the junction itself, its coverage arc optimized for the busy convergence point where most traffic concentrated. The holding siding 4 miles to the north sat at the very edge of that coverage arc, in a zone where the Panzer's low-altitude engagement envelope was degraded by the curvature of the terrain and the distance from the radar head. It was not undefended, but it was less well defended than the junction itself, and the strike planners recognized that the train's scheduled hold would place it, for 40 minutes, in the weakest point of the air defense umbrella it would pass through on its entire journey. Russia's own scheduling had created the vulnerability. The SBU operational cell assigned 9 pilots and a strike package built around the specific challenge of destroying armor rather than soft-skinned logistics targets. Destroying a fuel tanker or a boxcar full of ammunition is, in drone strike terms, relatively straightforward. Those targets are thin-skinned and volatile, and a single well-placed warhead produces catastrophic secondary effects. A main battle tank is a fundamentally harder target. The T-90 meters is protected by composite armor and relict explosive reactive armor specifically designed to defeat shape-charge warheads of exactly the type carried by FPV drones. A single RPG-7 warhead striking the frontal or side armor of a T-90 meters would very likely be defeated by the reactive armor blocks, producing spectacular visual effect but leaving the tank fundamentally intact and repairable. The solution the planning cell developed exploited the one condition that made these tanks vastly more vulnerable than they would ever be in combat. They were strapped to flat cars, in fixed positions, with their weakest armor exposed and their crews absent. A tank in combat orients its thickest frontal armor toward the threat and can maneuver to keep it there. A tank on a flat car cannot orient anything. Its thin top armor, the weakest protection on any main battle tank, faced straight up toward a drone diving from above. Its engine deck, its ventilation grills, its external fuel tanks, and the vulnerable seam where the turret meets the hull were all exposed and accessible to a drone attacking from the correct angle. The strike plan called for the drones to attack each tank from a steep diving angle, striking the thin top armor and engine deck rather than wasting warheads against the reactive armor on the tank's flanks. The package deployed in 3 elements. A first wave of 2 decoy drones would approach the siding from the east to trigger and map the Panzer battery's response. A second wave of 6 strike FPVs, each carrying a warhead optimized for top attack penetration, would strike the armor during the confusion created by the decoy engagement. Each pilot assigned specific tank targets to avoid wasted redundancy. A third wave of 1 drone would remain in reserve, tasked with striking the fuel and ammunition cars at the rear of the train only after the armor had been engaged, converting what would otherwise be a simple logistics loss into a chain reaction catastrophe that would consume the entire consist. The relay chain used the standard 3-drone layered architecture, with the primary relay masked behind a low ridgeline to the northwest to keep it below the Panzer's radar horizon. Every pilot had studied the exact loading configuration of the train from satellite imagery, memorizing which flat car carried which vehicle and the precise diving angle required to strike each tank's most vulnerable point. They had rehearsed the attack against a digitally reconstructed model of the siding and the train's known holding position more than 50 times each, flying the approach at multiple simulated jamming intensities until the sequence became reflexive. At 3:41 a.m., with the armored train confirmed to have entered its scheduled hold at the siding exactly as the intercepted dispatcher traffic had predicted, The relay drones lifted off from a staging position 11 miles to the northwest and took up their layered positions, the primary relay threading behind the low ridgeline at an altitude of 290 feet to stay below the Panzer's radar horizon while maintaining line of sight to the strike corridor. Signal checks confirmed clean control feeds to all 9 pilots by 3:46 a.m. At 3:52 a.m., the 2 decoy drones lifted off and began their approach from the east at 800 feet, deliberately conspicuous, flying a direct heading toward the siding that would bring them within the Panzer battery's engagement envelope. Their purpose was to draw the battery's attention and its missiles toward the eastern approach while the real strike package closed from the northwest, exploiting the degraded coverage at the edge of the Panzer's arc. The Panzer's radar acquired the decoys at 3:55 a.m. at a range of 9 miles. The battery, seeing 2 contacts approaching a high-value armored train on a direct attack bearing, engaged without hesitation. 257 E-6 missiles launched in sequence, both connecting, destroying both decoys cleanly against the eastern sky. From the Panzer crew's perspective, they had detected and defeated an attempted drone strike on the train. From Ukraine's perspective, the battery had just expended missiles, revealed its position and reaction time, and oriented its attention and its radar toward the eastern approach at the exact moment the real strike package was closing from the northwest, low and silent, below the radar horizon. At 3:57 a.m., the 6 strike FPVs of the second wave crossed the final ridgeline and dropped into the shallow valley where the siding sat. The train laid out before them in the pre-dawn darkness exactly as the satellite imagery had shown it. The locomotive at the head, then the long line of flat cars, each carrying the unmistakable low silhouette of a T-90 meters tank, its gun barrel locked in the travel position, its crew absent, its armor useless against what was coming. The operator's video feeds, relayed cleanly through the ridge-masked primary relay, showed the armor in sharp detail as the drones lined up their attack runs. The pilots had been assigned targets in sequence to avoid 2 drones striking the same tank. The lead pilot took the first tank on the 3rd flat car, pushing his drone into a steep diving angle that brought it down almost vertically onto the tank's engine deck at the rear of the hull, the thinnest and most vulnerable armor on the entire vehicle, directly above the engine and the rear fuel cells. The warhead detonated against the engine deck grating and drove its penetrating jet down into the engine compartment. The result was immediate. Fire erupted from the engine deck and the tank's own onboard fuel ignited, a column of flame rising from the flat car within seconds. The 2nd, 3rd, and 4th pilots struck in rapid succession, each diving onto the engine deck or turret roof of their assigned tanks, each warhead finding the thin top armor that no reactive armor block protected. 3 more tanks caught fire in the space of 12 seconds. The 5th pilot's drone suffered a partial signal degradation as it entered its dive and struck slightly off its intended aim point, hitting the junction between the turret and the hull rather than the engine deck. But the strike at that vulnerable seam still penetrated, and smoke began pouring from the tank's interior. The 6th pilot struck the last of his assigned tanks squarely on the turret roof, the warhead punching through into the crew compartment and igniting the ammunition stored in the turret bustle, producing a sharper secondary explosion that blew the hatches open and sent a jet of flames straight up into the night. In under 30 seconds, 6 of the 10 T-90 meters tanks on the train were burning. But the strike was not finished, and what happened next converted a severe loss into a catastrophic one. At 3:58 a.m., with 6 tanks already burning along the length of the train, the 7th drone, the reserve aircraft that had been held back for exactly this moment, began its run toward the rear of the consist where the fuel and ammunition cars sat separated from the armor by the gap of empty flat cars. The Russian precaution of separating the volatile cargo from the expensive armor had been designed to prevent a single strike on the fuel or ammunition from spreading to the tanks. It had not been designed for the reverse scenario. Tanks already burning, throwing flame and heat and burning fuel across the train, while a drone deliberately targeted the fuel cars to link the 2 fires together. The 7th drone struck the lead fuel car at the rear of the consist. The tank car, loaded with diesel intended to fuel the armored group on arrival, ruptured and ignited in a fireball that engulfed the adjacent fuel cars within seconds. The fire spread to the ammunition boxcars behind them, and now the entire rear section of the train was burning fiercely, feeding a fire that spread forward along the consist toward the empty flat cars that had been intended as a fire break. But a fire break of empty steel flat cars means nothing when the fire is being carried by the wind and by burning fuel flowing along the track bed. Over the following minutes, the fire bridged the gap, reaching the tanks that had survived the initial strike. The 1490 meters tanks that the drone strikes had not directly hit did not survive the fire that followed. Ammunition inside the burning tanks began cooking off. Each tank stored shells, detonating in sequence as the fire reached them, the blasts throwing turrets from hulls in the signature catastrophic failure mode of a main battle tank suffering an ammunition detonation. One after another along the length of the train, the tanks that had survived the drones died in the fire, until all 10 T-90 meters tanks, all 6 BMP-3 infantry fighting vehicles, and the entire fuel and ammunition load were burning together in a single continuous conflagration, stretching half a mile along the siding. By the time the fire burned itself out hours later, the train that had entered the siding as a tank battalion's worth of the most modern armor Russia fields had been reduced to a line of gutted, blackened hulks, their turrets scattered, their hulls split open, their tracks fused to the flat cars beneath them. Nothing on the train was salvageable. Not one tank, not one fighting vehicle, not one round of ammunition would reach the southern front. At 4:01 a.m., as the fire was still spreading, the first frantic communications began flooding the Russian rail control and security nets, intercepted in full by SBU Signal's intelligence teams monitoring the operation. The security detachment responsible for protecting the train reported an ongoing drone strike, requested immediate air defense support, and called for fire suppression assets that did not exist anywhere near the siding in the quantity the situation demanded. The Pantsir battery that had defeated the decoy drones minutes earlier reoriented toward the northwest. But by the time its radar swept the strike corridor, the strike drones had already completed their runs and the reserve drone was clear. There was nothing left to engage. The battery had spent its attention and 2 missiles on the decoys and had been looking in the wrong direction at the decisive moment. The scale of the loss forced a response that went far beyond the single train. Within hours, Russian rail authorities halted all high-value armored movements through the Dzhankoi approaches, pending a review of how a train carrying 10 T-90 meters tanks had been caught immobile at a siding and destroyed in its entirety. Intercepted communications over the following days revealed a scramble to reassess the vulnerability of scheduled holds, the practice of parking high-value trains at sidings to wait for junction clearance, now recognized as an enormous and previously underappreciated risk. New procedures were hastily developed, requiring armored trains to minimize time spent stationary within striking range of the front, a change that would slow every future armored movement into Crimea by forcing trains to hold farther back, in less convenient positions, adding delay and complexity to an already strained logistics system. The destruction of 10 T-90 meters tanks in a single strike represented a loss of a fundamentally different character from the fuel and ammunition losses that dominate most railway interdiction. Fuel can be replaced from the next shipment. Ammunition is produced in enormous quantities. But the T-90 meters is manufactured at a single primary facility, the Uralvagonzavod plant, at a production rate that even under wartime mobilization struggles to keep pace with battlefield losses. 10 to 90 meters tanks destroyed in a single strike represented a significant fraction of the plant's monthly output of new-build tanks, wiped out in 30 seconds by 9 operators and 7 drones before those tanks had ever reached a battlefield or fired a single shot. This is the compounding logic that makes armored rail interdiction among the most cost-effective forms of warfare available to Ukraine. The exchange ratio is staggering. 7 FPV drones and their warheads, costing in total perhaps a few $1,000s, had destroyed roughly $45 million of the most modern armor Russia fields, along with the infantry fighting vehicles, fuel, and ammunition that would have brought that armor into combat. And the loss was not merely financial. Every T-90 meters destroyed on that siding was a tank that would not appear on the southern front, would not lead an assault, would not need to be countered by Ukrainian anti-tank teams expending their own resources and taking their own risks. The cheapest way to defeat a tank is to destroy it before it ever reaches the fight, immobile on a flat car, its crew not even aboard. Russia will continue to move armor into Crimea by rail because it has no better option. Driving tanks overland wears them out and exposes them to the same drones under even worse conditions. But every armored train now moves under the shadow of what happened at that siding near Dzhankoi. Every scheduled hold is now a calculated risk. Every junction approach is a gauntlet. And every T-90 meters that Russia loads onto a flat car bound for Crimea carries with it the knowledge that the most dangerous part of its journey is not the front line at all, but the long, slow, vulnerable passage by rail, strapped down and defenseless through territory where Ukrainian drones have proven they can reach out and turn an entire tank battalion into scrap metal before it ever arrives. No armored train into Crimea is safe anymore. No siding is a refuge. No air defense umbrella, however dense over the junctions, can cover every mile of every approach against drones that attack from the one angle a tank on a flat car can never defend. Ukraine found the moment of maximum vulnerability, the scheduled hold at the weakest point in the coverage, and struck it precisely. 9 operators turned 10 of Russia's best tanks into burning wreckage before dawn. And every Russian logistics commander planning the next armored shipment south now has to reckon with a battlefield that begins not at the front, but on the rails, hundreds of miles behind it. If you believe Ukraine deserves to live in peace and freedom, hit like, subscribe to the channel, and share this video. Every bit of your support helps more people understand what is really happening in this war. Thank you for watching. See you in the next video.